Mark didn't even turn off the engine when he rolled down the window and said, "Mom, you don't really need this van anymore." The morning air smelled like wet grass and gasoline, and I stood there in my house slippers, watching my own son's hand rest on my steering wheel like it already belonged to him. If you've ever smiled through something that quietly hurt, stay with me. Sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that change everything. I remember the way the sun hit the cracked corner of the windshield as he spoke, like the light itself was pointing out every flaw. The van wasn't pretty. The paint on the hood had faded to a dull, chalky blue, and there was a dent near the back bumper from when I misjudged the mailbox 3 winters ago. But it was clean inside. I kept it clean. It still smelled faintly like the lemon wipes I used every Sunday after church. Mark leaned his arm out the window, casual as could be. "You hardly drive, Mom. It's just sitting here. We can really use it right now." We. Not, "Can I borrow it?" Not, "Do you mind?" Just, we can use it. Jenna sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, even though the sun was still low. She gave me a tight smile. The kids were in the back, their faces glowing blue from a tablet screen. Nobody looked at me like I was the owner of that vehicle. More like I was a stop along the way. "I have my doctor's appointment Thursday," I said, folding my arms against the chill. "And I go to the grocery store on Tuesdays." "I'll take you," Mark said quickly. "Or Jenna can. You shouldn't be driving much anyway. Traffic's crazy these days." I nodded like that made sense, like I was the kind of woman who didn't notice her own life getting smaller. But I did notice. I noticed every little thing. What he didn't see was the way my fingers curled into my cardigan sleeves, the way my jaw tightened. I'd learned a long time ago how to swallow words before they turned into arguments. Peace in the family always felt more important than being right. But I didn't tell him why that van mattered more than he knew. "Just for a while," he added, already shifting the gear into reverse. "We'll bring it back." Dolores Hernandez's curtains twitched across the street. She always noticed everything. Retired nurse, sharp as a tack, heart bigger than our whole block. I could almost feel her eyes on me, measuring the situation. "Okay," I said softly. The van rolled backward, tires crunching over the loose gravel at the edge of the driveway. I stood there longer than I needed to, watching the taillights blink as Mark turned onto Maple Ridge Drive. The house behind me felt suddenly too quiet, like someone had taken more than just a vehicle. Dolores crossed the street before I even made it back to my front steps. "Morning, Linda," she called gently. "You doing all right?" I pasted on a smile. "Of course. Mark just needed the van for a bit." She stopped at the bottom of the steps, hands on her hips. "Did he ask?" I hesitated. Just a second. But it was long enough. Her expression softened. "Honey." "It's fine," I said quickly. "They've got a lot going on. 2 kids, work, bills. You know how it is." She climbed the steps anyway and followed me inside without waiting to be invited, like she'd done 100 times before. The house smelled like the coffee I'd brewed an hour earlier and forgotten to drink. It had gone cold in my favorite chipped mug, the one with the tiny blue flowers around the rim. Dolores touched my arm. "You don't have to pretend with me." I looked at the empty space through the kitchen window where the van should have been. That driveway had held that vehicle every single day for 6 years, through snowstorms, heat waves, and the long, lonely evenings after Frank died. I bought that van 3 months after the funeral. Used, high mileage, but reliable. I remember sitting in the dealership office, my purse clutched in my lap, widow's benefit statement folded inside. The salesman kept talking to my son, even though I was the one writing the check. "I can handle it," I'd told Mark back then, too. And I had. Every payment, every oil change, every new set of tires. I worked part-time at the library shelving books until my knees started complaining louder than the customers. That van was my proof that I could still take care of myself. I didn't tell Mark that. Dolores poured my cold coffee down the sink and started a fresh pot without asking. "You going to tell me what's really eating at you?" I sat at the kitchen table and traced the edge of a placemat Frank and I bought in Gatlinburg on our 40th anniversary trip. It was faded now, but I couldn't throw it away. "It's just a van," I said, but even to my own ears, it sounded like a lie. Because it wasn't just a van. It was the last thing in my life that still answered only to me. What Mark didn't know, what I'd never had the courage to say out loud, was that the glove box held something he'd forgotten about. Something I'd kept all these years, tucked inside a worn manila envelope beneath the old registration papers and a flashlight that barely worked. I had almost thrown that envelope away last spring when I cleaned out the console, but something stopped me. Maybe instinct, maybe fear, maybe the quiet voice inside me that had finally gotten tired of being ignored. Dolores set a fresh mug in front of me, steam curled up between us. "You sure you're okay with this?" she asked. I wrapped both hands around the warmth. "He thinks he's helping," I said. She gave me a look that said she knew better. I stared out at the empty driveway again, my reflection faint in the glass. For the first time, I let myself think a thought I'd pushed away for years. Maybe helping him had cost me more than I realized. And as I sat there, listening to the coffee maker click off, I had a feeling this time things weren't going to stay quiet. Dolores didn't rush me. She just sat across from me at the kitchen table, stirring a teaspoon of sugar into her coffee like she had all the time in the world. The ticking clock above the stove filled the silence, steady and patient. I kept my hands wrapped around my mug, even after the heat faded. "You ever notice," she said gently, "how we start giving things away little by little? First it's time, then it's money, then it's decisions." I gave a small smile. "You make it sound like a yard sale." "Sometimes it is," she said. "Only nobody puts price tags on what matters." I looked down at the table. The wood had a thin scratch near the edge from when Mark was 10 and tried to carve his initials with a butter knife. I'd scolded him then, but secretly, I'd liked that the house carried pieces of him. Back when he still asked before taking things. "I didn't want to be difficult," I murmured. Dolores leaned forward. "Linda, there's a difference between being kind and being erased." Her words settled deep, heavier than I expected. I opened my mouth to defend Mark, to say he meant well, but the excuses felt tired, like shoes worn thin at the heel. I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen drawer beside the fridge, the one I kept closed with a rubber band because the handle was loose. I slipped it off, reached inside, and pulled out the worn manila envelope. Dolores watched quietly as I brought it back to the table. "What's that?" she asked. Something I should have dealt with a long time ago. The flap was soft from years of handling. I slid out the papers, old loan documents, a lien release notice I never mailed, and a photocopy of the van's title with my name still listed as sole owner. Mark had once asked me to transfer it after borrowing it temporarily during a rough patch. I'd signed nothing. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. There's never a right time to admit you're afraid. "He still thinks it's basically his," I said, "but legally, it's not." Dolores adjusted her glasses and read the top page. "And this loan?" My chest tightened. From when his landscaping business went under, he needed a co-signer. I didn't tell Frank. My voice cracked on my husband's name. "I thought I could fix it before it mattered." "But you ended up paying it." I nodded. "Used most of the savings Frank left me. I told everyone the money went to house repairs. Dolores reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Oh, Linda. I thought if I just kept helping, he'd get ahead, that it was my job as a mother. And did he? I looked toward the window again. A squirrel darted along the fence, free and quick, answerable to no one. No, I whispered. He just got used to being rescued. I didn't know how long we sat there before my phone buzzed against the table. Mark's name lit up the screen. My heart jumped, hard enough to make my coffee ripple. I answered on the second ring. Hi, sweetheart. His voice sounded tight, rushed. Mom, there's been a little accident. Everything inside me went still. Is everyone okay? Yeah, we're fine. Just a bump in a parking lot. But the other guy wants insurance info and... He hesitated. You still have the policy on the van, right? I glanced at Dolores. She gave me a steady look, the kind nurses use when they already know the truth. Yes, I said slowly. But Mark, did you look in the glove box? There was a pause. Why? There's an envelope in there. I need you to open it. Paper rustled over the line. I could picture him sitting in the driver's seat, frowning, the kids asking questions in the back. Mom, this is old stuff. Read it. Another pause, longer this time. It says the title's still in your name. That's right. And this lien release, it's not filed. I never sent it. His breathing changed, slower, uneasy. Why would you keep all this? Because I was scared to stop saving you, I thought. But I didn't say that. Because I never stopped being responsible for it, I said instead. Okay, but insurance will cover it, right? Maybe, I said. But if something bigger had happened, Mark, I could have lost everything. Silence. I heard for the first time in years the sound of my son not knowing what to say. Have you ever realized, too late, that your silence was costing you more than speaking up ever would? Stay with me, because this was the moment everything started to shift. Mom, he said quietly, I thought you didn't care about the van. I closed my eyes. I cared about not fighting with you. Another long pause, then softer. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. That's the problem. We ended the call with promises to talk later, to exchange information, to figure it out. But when I set the phone down, my hands were shaking. Dolores stood and wrapped her arms around me. I hadn't realized I was crying until her sweater sleeve grew damp. That was your first boundary, she whispered, even if he doesn't see it yet. I nodded against her shoulder. It didn't feel like strength. It felt like grief, because part of me still wished he'd just come home, hand me the keys and say, I'm sorry, Mom, I should have asked. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I had finally said out loud what I'd kept buried for years, and there was no folding that truth back up into an envelope. That afternoon, Dolores drove me to the insurance office because my nerves wouldn't let me sit still. The building was one of those low brick places near the strip mall, with faded posters about safe driving taped to the windows. I'd been a customer there for over a decade, but I'd never walked in feeling like this, like my future might hinge on paperwork. A young man named Trevor called us back. He couldn't have been older than 30. He smiled politely, the way people do when they see gray hair and assume confusion. How can I help you today, Ms. Whitaker? My son had a minor accident in my vehicle, I said carefully. I need to understand my liability. His eyebrows lifted just slightly. That got his attention. We went through everything. Policy limits, listed drivers, coverage conditions. When he confirmed Mark wasn't listed as a regular driver, my stomach dropped, even though I'd expected it. In this case, Trevor explained gently. Coverage may still apply since he had implied permission, but repeated, undocumented use could be an issue. Meaning? Meaning it's best to clarify ownership and usage going forward, in writing. Dolores gave my knee a reassuring squeeze. On the drive home, I stared out the window at the passing storefronts. Nail salon, hardware store, bakery that always smelled like cinnamon. Life moving along, ordinary and steady, while mine felt like it had cracked open. I feel like I failed him, I said quietly. Dolores kept her eyes on the road. No, Linda. You loved him the only way you knew how. Now you're learning a better way. That evening, Mark came over alone. No Jenna, no kids. He stood in the doorway, looking older than he had that morning. I'm sorry, he said right away. I really thought you didn't need it. I let him sit at the kitchen table where the envelope lay between us. I needed to be asked, I said. I needed to be seen. He rubbed his face with both hands. Things have been tight. I didn't want to worry you. I almost laughed at that. You worried me more by pretending I wasn't part of the decision. We talked for a long time, about money, about pride, about the years after Frank died when I said yes to everything because saying no felt like losing more. That's when I noticed, I said slowly, that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as someone who had a life of her own. He looked up, eyes shiny. I never meant to make you feel small. I know, I said, but intentions don't erase impact. The words surprised even me. Calm, clear, true. When he left that night, he hugged me longer than usual. I stood at the door watching him walk down the steps, shoulders heavy with thoughts he'd never had to carry before. And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not relief, but space. Room to breathe. Room to exist without shrinking. I didn't know what would happen next between us, whether this would pull us apart or help us rebuild. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to being quiet. The house felt different the next morning. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. Like the air had finally cleared after a storm that had been threatening for years. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my coffee mug, and noticed my hands weren't trembling anymore. Mark didn't call that day, or the next. Part of me worried I'd pushed too hard. The other part, the quieter, steadier part, knew space was necessary. Growth doesn't happen while everyone's still pretending. Dolores came over that afternoon with a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. Peace offering, she said, setting it on the counter. For you, not him. I laughed, and it felt good, real. I keep thinking I should have done this sooner, I told her. She shook her head. We all wake up when we're ready, not a minute before. Later that week, I met with an elder law attorney Mr. Halverson from church recommended. His office smelled like old books and lemon polish. We talked about practical things, vehicle liability, updating my will, medical directives, grown-up things I had avoided because they made me feel old. But I didn't feel old sitting there. I felt responsible, present in my own life. Boundaries aren't punishments, the attorney said kindly as he handed me a folder of documents. They're instructions for how others can stay in relationship with you safely. I carried that sentence home like it was something fragile and important. A few days later, Mark came by again. He looked tired, but not defensive this time. He held out the van keys in his palm. I filled the tank, he said, and I'm adding you as an additional insured driver on our car, so you'll always have a ride if you need one, but only if you ask. I took the keys slowly. The metal felt heavier than I remembered. We sat at the table, not across from each other like opponents, but side by side. He told me about the credit card debt, the late mortgage payment, how ashamed he felt asking for help again. "I didn't want you to think I was failing," he admitted. "Oh, honey," I said softly, "you don't have to succeed to deserve respect, but you do have to be honest." He nodded, eyes glassy. If you've ever struggled to balance love with limits, you know how hard this moment can be. Tell me, have you ever had to set a boundary that scared you? He left that day with a plan to meet a financial counselor his friend recommended. I didn't offer money. I offered encouragement. It was harder than writing a check, but it felt right. That night, I stood at the front window and looked at the van in the driveway. Same dents, same faded paint. But something had changed. It wasn't just transportation anymore. It was proof that I was still allowed to take up space. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. Life didn't transform overnight. There were no dramatic speeches or tearful family reunions on the front lawn. What happened instead was quieter, slower, real. Mark started calling once a week just to talk, not to ask for anything. The first few times felt awkward, like we were learning a new language with each other. But eventually, the conversation settled into something steady. One Saturday morning, he showed up with a toolbox and fixed the loose step on my porch without being asked. I watched from the doorway, arms folded against the cool breeze, and felt something mend inside me that I hadn't realized was broken. "Figured you shouldn't trip coming in with groceries," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Thank you," I replied, and I meant it without any hidden ache behind the words. He kept up with the payment plan for the insurance deductible, not perfectly, but consistently. He sold some old equipment from the garage. Jenna picked up extra shifts at the clinic. They were figuring it out on their own. Dolores and I resumed our morning walks. I drove us to the park one crisp afternoon, windows down, wind tugging at my hair. I hadn't realized how much I missed that simple feeling of going somewhere under my own power. The manila envelope now lived in my kitchen drawer, neatly labeled in black marker. Important, Linda. It wasn't a secret anymore. It was a reminder. One evening near sunset, I took the long way home from the grocery store, passing the high school football field where Mark used to play. I remembered sitting in the bleachers, cheering until my throat hurt, believing my job was to shield him from every disappointment. I see now that my job was to raise him strong enough to face them. As I pulled into my driveway, the sky streaked pink and gold above the rooftops. I sat there a moment, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. I hadn't lost my son. I had found my voice. And somehow, that helped him find his footing too. Love doesn't mean handing over the keys to your life. It means teaching the people you care about how to walk beside you, not over you. I gathered my groceries and headed inside, the screen door creaking softly behind me. The house felt warm, lived in, mine. If this story touched you, I'd be honored if you stayed connected. Subscribe, like, and share so more people can hear stories about dignity, family, and quiet strength. And I'd truly love to read your thoughts. Leave a comment and tell me what boundaries have changed your life.